Good morning, it is 7 a.m. on the Friday the 21st of May 2021. My name is Arran Hunt, I'm a partner here at Stace Hammond Law and I head up the Migration Partners team. It's been a couple of weeks since the last video, but it's been a very busy few weeks. Today we'll be covering what has happened in the past week, a surprise that came up on Wednesday for those who are working as carers. And something that was mentioned in the budget yesterday. We're going to be including a number of clips from Parliament last week. So it's going to be a longer video, but we're going to include the timings in the description below so you can just jump to the point you want to get to. And we'll do the videos and that at the end and the sort of the news at the beginning. There was a lot more I wanted to include in this video, but it just became too long, so we'll have to do those in a future video, hopefully next week. As always, this is not legal advice, this is just our commentary on immigration here in New Zealand. If you're looking for legal advice, then please email us at the address visas@shlaw.co.nz, also in the description below. We've managed to get through actually our backlog of inquiries. There was a lot there, we've managed to get through those. Sorry that we replied a little bit late for some of those, other ones we're applying much faster now. Also working to get through the remaining comments on our videos in the past 2 weeks. I'm sorry, it's just been too much workload to try and get through them as I usually would, as fast as I usually do. Working on that still and hopefully get those finished today or Monday. So, we're going to start with the updates from the past week, then we'll cover what happened at Wellington last Thursday. Now on Friday morning last week, the day after the events in Wellington, a rumour started going around that the government was going to cancel 30,000 applications that were sitting in the queue for residence. Now this was pushed out by an immigration industry professionals group, and I know of how it actually all started, and it really was someone just asking them a question and somebody else seeing that question as a suggestion, as being a rumour, and then sort of running with it. As we say again and again, don't listen to rumours. This one got larger and larger and caused quite a panic. I was at an event that Friday night and there was definitely a conversation about it. Professionals I spoke to about it saw nothing to it and recognised it as being what it was just a rumour. But it was a dangerous thing for an industry group to be pushing out there, and they were pushing it out there to its members, and their members are immigration advisors and lawyers like myself. But there really was no basis to it. And then the Prime Minister, of course, then made an announcement that there would be an announcement made by the Minister of Immigration on the Monday. The old good old announcement of an announcement. And that started a whole lot of new fear and anxiety, as there was little detail about what he was going to be speaking about. Would it be in relation to the 30,000 that had just gone round, that room that had gone round? Would it be about the points, the long overdue announcement as to when the SMC draws would begin? Would it be an announcement about the points change that had been rumoured and worked on for the previous year? There was no leading up to it. We had nothing ready to go on, no idea what the government was doing. And honestly, after watching the almost 1 hour long announcement, we still have no idea actually of what the government is doing. After the craziness of that Friday rumour and the announcement of the speech had created, the Honourable Stuart Nash, who was standing in for an unwell Chris Fafoy, then spent the hour saying really nothing. There was the usual discussions about how the government wanted to train more locals and be less reliant on migrants, but we hear that from every single government. There was actually no policy. The Prime Minister had effectively announced that there would be an announcement on Monday, and that was about future announcements. There was no detail. It was just sort of very broad strokes of, we'd like to train more Kiwis, well, great, then do it. It was an hour wasted. It was a lot of fear and anxiety created for migrants onshore and offshore for nothing. It really was a zero event. Well, there has been some policy changes in the last few days though, and I want to sort of just quickly go over those. There has been some things that have changed. These weren't really in relation to that Monday announcement. It was just things that did happen the last few days. The first and the bigger one, I think, is the change to the calculation of hourly pay. There has been an issue for those of you working in carer roles that may require you to sleep over, to be available in case there was something happens at night time. And under legislation, you're required to be paid the minimum wage, at least for that time there, and often you are paid the minimum wage, but you're not paid your usual full rate. What it meant though is that if you added up your full rate hours at $25.50 or above, and then you added in these minimum wage hours, that brought your average wage down below the median. And as per Immigration New Zealand rules, you weren't going to be eligible to apply for one of these sort of 3-year visas or to go for a skilled migrant, because in your job you're required to stay there and be paid this lower rate. So, with this change, those sleeping hours will now not be included in the calculation of your average hourly rate. It was great, honestly, to be able to notify people who had come to us with this question, about to say to them, hey, there's been a change now, here's the new rules that have come through from immigration. And thanks to MP James McDowell, I think of the ACT Party, for raising this anomaly within Parliament and for getting it fixed. It is one thing, it's a rare thing to actually see the immigration fixing one of these issues that we find, so it's great to see that pressure being applied and a result coming through for what is, we think, a pretty obvious thing they should have done in the first place. There are still more things to fix. We're going to cover that in our anomaly video. It'll probably be the next video we do. We're just going to run out of time with today. The second change came to our attention on Monday this week, and it seemed to have just been sort of slid into the rules without any fanfare. On a day that we had the 1 hour of not very much from the Honourable Stuart Nash, someone noticed that there was now 2 projects under the list of government projects that relate to investors. Now, this list, of course, is related to border exceptions. If you are working on one of these, or involved in one of these government projects, they can give you a border section to come into the country. Now, these allowed the government to shoulder tap people that they want to bring in as investors. But only that sort of group. So for our clients wanting to invest in New Zealand, this was nothing. They would still not have access. It again seemed like the government was ignoring its own rules and deciding who was special enough to be allowable across the border. Now, the average investor wanting to bring in millions of dollars to create jobs, to create businesses and to build a life here can't get a border exception. If we go to the minister, he won't even listen to our pleas. He won't even look at our letters. He'll just say, yeah, sorry, you're offshore. We're not going to consider it or even read your letter. But those with government contacts can, and they get invited by the government on this new little thing that's been slid in there. It's one of those places where the rules are meant to be applied equally to all, but some people are more equal than others, it seems. And there was another anomaly actually brought to our attention this week, and this one here is another sort of strange anomaly that again fits within the sort of what's best for government, but perhaps not what's best for all. Now, while there is no allowance for new PhD students to be granted a border exception, I know a number of you have come to me about this, there is an allowance for those who are working on a scientific project, even though that normally wouldn't fit within the rules. So if you're offered a job on a government-sponsored science project, you can gain a work visa and a border exception to be in New Zealand under that project. At the same time, that visa could be varied to allow you to study for your PhD, which generally you can't sort of study that many hours when you're doing a work visa. So this is another anomaly, it seems, and it actually looks like, again, the government saying, well, you know, we can't have PhD students unless you're doing some work for us, which just seems to again be this strange sort of situation. We were actually going to include a number of immigration anomalies in this video. We're going to do that in a later video. This is going to be one of the anomalies. We'll probably mention it again, but there's a long list of these anomalies that we are that are appearing. And finally, one last piece of news. There was 2 interesting points included in yesterday's budget. First was a note from Treasury that forecasts a significant reopening of the border by the start of 2022. Now, that isn't something that the Treasury decides. It is very much their sort of hope or desire, perhaps, and it's what they're basing their numbers off, their figures for the future funds for the country off. But with new waves hitting a number of countries that were previously seen as handling COVID-19 pretty well, we think this is the Treasury being a bit optimistic. And we don't believe we'll see a complete opening anytime soon. In contrast, the Australian budget, which came out 10 days ago, said that they were looking at sort of opening that border in the mid-2022. So it does seem to be very much a different view of how things are going to go forward, and perhaps the Treasury is being optimistic just to help boost the figures. I don't know. We don't, of course, get included in what the internal conversations are between the government departments. It is one of the first times a government department has suggested a date, so we'll have to mention that. But just take it with caution. It's at least a date, though. I'm going to say it is a date, it's a plan, it's an optimistic one, but it's still something. It's much more than we've gotten from the Minister of Immigration when we asked him to set his date, provide us a plan, provide us sort of a time frame going forward. But he's failing even to provide us with a date that the SMC draws start, and that was due to be provided to us in March. So, yeah, it's something. We don't think it's an indication of what that government department is saying. If you do hear that going around the 1 January opening, just take it with a grain of salt, take it with a bit of caution. It is optimistic, and it's not up to Treasury as to when the border opens. The other interesting note was that Immigration New Zealand was receiving $173 million extra, or at least maybe total package, it wasn't clear, to enable them to continue their core services. Now, with them being restricted from doing their jobs, such as processing residence visas and all the offshore applications, the visa fees paid by people like yourselves are what usually covers those core costs, but they aren't there. So there's a need for the government to top these things up. And that's it for the updates, actually. Now, before you ask, there are no updates in regards to student visas, apart from the PhD thing we mentioned, work visa holders who are offshore, things like that. We wish we had something more for you, but we really can only just sort of give you information as to what has been provided by the government and by announcements or what we hear within the industry. Now to last week's events. So this is going to include a lot of videos from last week from Parliament. If you're only after the news, I think this is probably the point that you want to watch up to. If you're looking to hear myself speak, a few other MPs speak, then please watch on. I will try to cut the speeches down, trim out the bits in between. For those of you who, when I do the videos from Parliament, when I have trimmed them down, I have done so to try to save time. I've not done so to try to misrepresent what was said. So, in the past week we've had candlelight vigils across the country, and of course a rally on the steps of Parliament, the Beehive. Great speeches from within the community and speeches from government ministers and opposition MPs. Last Thursday, a number of us all met up at the Beehive for an event largely organised by the Federation of Aotearoa Migrants, along with a few other groups. I'm going to show a couple of video clips from the protest, but we can't show them all. Now, there was some truly heartbreaking speeches, and if I don't show a particular speech, it's only because I want to try to keep this video length down. We will provide a link to the whole video. I've taken these clips from, and thanks to the Immigration New Zealand Punjabi Hindi radio news channel for this video. They're a great Facebook group who regularly do live sessions with people like myself on what is happening with immigration. You'll see me on there once in a while, along with other people in the industry. At the protest, there was a number of issues being covered by the protest, but the main ones were split families, those called offshore, and there was a massive push around those waiting for years in queue for skilled migrant, or waiting for the skilled migrant draws to restart. To his credit, the Minister of Immigration did show up, and he had this to say to the crowd.
Thank you, Charlotte, for the invitation to be part of your rally this afternoon, and acknowledge everyone who has made the huge effort to come to Parliament this afternoon. I want to acknowledge the difficulties that you have been facing, the anxiety, stress that the times have created. Can I also acknowledge that these are extraordinary times, which have placed unprecedented restrictions of travel across the world. And the government is mindful of the disruption that has caused to many, many lives. Where we can, we are putting in place solutions within the constraints of COVID border controls. And as frustrating as they are, these border controls and our managed isolation regime are what is allowing all of us here in New Zealand to function in the relative freedom that we have and keep our communities safe from the virus. We need that position of strength to support our country's recovery and the ability for our lives to return to some form of normal. The COVID Pfizer vaccine rollout and opening up the quarantine travel-free bubbles with Australia and the Cook Islands are steps in that plan to return us to post-COVID normality. I can assure you that every day the government is looking at more ways to safely open up our borders, while making sure that we do that in such a way that allows our COVID health response and the people who are charged with delivering the health response to be able to cope. I'm sure there will be opportunities in the future to make further entry arrangements as the vaccine coverage adds protections for all of us, both here in New Zealand and in other parts of the world which are still struggling to contain the virus. And we will look to use these opportunities to help more of you in our migrant community. But I need to be realistic with you. And others will say, open the borders to everyone who has family here and wants to be reunited. But it is not that simple. Outside of the travel bubbles, which we can be reasonably confident are safe, almost every border entry carries the potential risk of COVID. And keeping tight control of our borders and maintaining strict managed isolation systems is what is keeping us all safe. But the reality of that is that we would normally have around 7 million people coming through our borders in a year. That flow is down to a little over 220,000. So that's the sort of massive disruption that's affecting not just your community, but a great many people in different ways across of New Zealand. Now, to everyone here, I don't say that to dismiss the difficult situations that you and your families are facing. It is an acknowledgement of the enormity of the issue affecting all of us in very many different ways. And New Zealand is not alone. We obviously have other countries that have border restrictions, the likes of Australia, Singapore, the UK, Canada. They are all operating systems of control on who can and can't come into the country, while looking for opportunities, like here in New Zealand, to increase the numbers who can come in. So while I'm here to acknowledge the difficulties that you are all facing, I also acknowledge that I can't today bring you the news that you want to hear. We are acutely aware of the disruption that this is causing. And as I have said, we will continue to look at ways to adjust border settings to safely accommodate more people coming into the country. Again, I would thank you and acknowledge the difficulties, but thank you for coming here.
Of course, the border closure and COVID-19 have nothing to do with the delay in processing residency applications, as these people are on shore and have been on shore for some time, quite often for years. COVID-19 was only relevant when the Immigration New Zealand offices were closed. They are open now and have been for some time. We'll now look at the response from the star of the day, National Party spokesperson for immigration, Erica Stanford.
Thank you, Charlotte, and thank you everyone again for being here. Can I just start by saying you shouldn't have to be here today. When you were here last time, you asked for a select committee inquiry so that you could have your voices heard. And I put that to the committee, and I want to put it on record here today that the government MPs on that committee voted it down. And here you are, back again, having to tell your stories on the forecourt of Parliament, heartbreaking stories of loss, of not being able to see your family, of having your young ones grow up without being able to work or study or even volunteer, wasting their lives because of a residency backlog that is a result of poor policy by this government. You are already here. These backlogs of residents were caused, as I say, by poor policy. They're not going fast enough, as you know that they've been able to do in the past. When these guys came into government, the residency queues were 6 to 9 months long. They're now 2 years long. And that is if you've had your application selected. For those of you who are stuck in the EOI pool that's been frozen for over a year, you're going absolutely nowhere. And I know that you're looking to leave New Zealand. I know you are. You're telling me. I'm looking at Canada. I'm looking at Australia.
UK.
I'm looking at the UK.
Yeah.
Because why would you stay here when there is no certainty, no surety? All you're living with is stress and anxiety.
Yeah.
And for those children who are turning 18 and who have already turned 18, who are sitting at home doing nothing, wasting their youth, that is a tragedy. And there is no fair-minded person in this country who would think that is right. And we will be calling loud for this government to give those students or those people who are turning 18 a work visa so that they can do something with their lives while they wait for this backlog of residents to be
remain
cleared.
dependent on their parents.
The other thing, while they can still remain dependent on their parents and come in under their residency.
Yes.
The other thing that we're calling on is to get rid of the residency backlog.
Yep.
It is an artificial backlog caused by poor policy because they didn't set residence program numbers and they are on a deliberate go slow to meet an artificial number. You are here, you are contributing to our society, you're paying your taxes,
And they
you're
open the
following
UI.
rules, you are good people, we value you, we don't want you to leave.
And they open the UI.
Yep. Not just UI.
Residency, yeah, man. That's true.
I want to finish because I don't want to take much more time. There are more people to speak. But I want to say to you all, thank you. Thank you for your contribution to this country.
Thank
you
you
for
so much.
working hard. Thank you for caring about your families. There is nothing more important than families. And the way that we have treated the split migrant families over the last 12 months is nothing short of disgusting.
This is home!
We knew right at the beginning of COVID that there would be a few months of disruption, but there is no reason right now why you are still separated from your families. There is no reason for that.
This
And
is
the
home.
announcement that we heard a few weeks ago was not a real announcement.
Yes,
Because
don't come in that
that story was more about who was left out than who was left in.
Yeah.
There were so many fine print details in that announcement that meant thousands of people would not be reunited with their families. And here you are all today to remind us of that.
I have just one question. Does it mean that if you earn more, you love your partner more, and if you are not earning more, you hate your partner?
$106,080 is worth your life.
Excellent point. For those of you who didn't hear it at the
Do
back,
we love our partner?
if you earn over $107,000, you must miss your family more than those who don't. At a teacher's salary like Cam Conradi, you clearly don't miss your children as much as the person earning over 107. Another disgusting move by this government. All migrants miss their families. All migrants deserve a roadmap to reunification so they know when they will see their families again, and that is what we demand from this minister.
It should not be.
Okay, this is post-video editing, Arran speaking. I was editing this video and was cutting my speech from the end of the rally so I can insert it into the video later on. But I kept going back to watch the speeches from the migrants at the rally and these heart-breaking stories that they were providing to us. People with such warmth, but going through so much that it just seemed wrong to put my video in front of theirs or my video in there without actually looking at what they had to say. So while I've still included my piece, I'm going to put it after theirs. I want to let you hear what they had to say before you hear what I have to say. So I think what they had to say is of just such a great importance. So at the end of this video, I've added in a bunch of speeches from the migrants who were there that day at the rally, giving their views. I've included my speeches at the end after those. That was my speech that I had at the rally and also the interview I did prior to the rally. As I do not believe that there is anything that I can say that will have any more impact than the messages that they share. So yeah, that will be at the end of the video now. Okay, now back to what I recorded earlier. My thanks to the National MP, the Honourable Nick Smith. They call him the father of the house. He's the longest standing MP, been there since 1990. And now he remained to listen to everyone speak until the end of the protest. And for that I do give him a lot of respect for hearing people out and hearing what they had to say. And to do so in a way that he wasn't trying to be front and centre. He was there just to listen, and I do hugely respect you. Thank you, Honourable Nick Smith. After that we headed into Parliament for question time. Now I'm going to show question 10. Now for those of you who don't know, question time is where opposition MPs, or actually their own government MPs, can raise a question to a minister about a certain topic. And it does seem to go between government parties, or the government party and opposition parties. And the government parties will ask these questions where it's all forecast, it's all pre-prepared, and there's this great response from the minister praising his own party. When it comes to the opposition questions, they are usually a lot more driving. They usually open up with a very broad question because the Minister knows in advance what that first question is going to be. So you'll see the question here from Erica Stanford is very broad. And the Minister responds, actually a longer response than we typically see for the question that Erica asks. But then Erica starts honing in onto the certain topics she wants to cover. And these are things which the Minister, well, should know are coming up because he should know these are anomalies, these are issues within immigration. But it's things that he wasn't aware of until the actual question was spoken to him. So this is question 10. I've edited out to remove the space between the questions, just trying to make it a bit smoother to watch, but it is a little bit longer than usual these clips are.
Question number 10, Erica Stanford.
To the Minister of Immigration, does he stand by all of his statements and actions?
The Honourable Chris Farfoy.
Mr Speaker, yes, this government's priorities include keeping New Zealanders safe from COVID-19. The government has taken a tough decision to keep the border closed to protect New Zealand from a global pandemic. Closing our border was critical to keep COVID-19 out and keep our economy open and keep New Zealanders safe. We acknowledge that these decisions have caused difficulties for people, but they've also enabled us to get through the pandemic without large outbreaks which continue to be experienced overseas. There is one statement I made in Tuesday night's annual review about the dependent children of residency visa applicants who are turning 18. For clarification, if a person in this situation applied for a student visa, they would need to pay international fees. However, they would be eligible for a work visa. But, Mr Speaker, what I absolutely stand by is this government's management of the border. Our border settings have saved lives, kept our economy strong and is keeping everyone in New Zealand safe.
Supplementary question. Could the Minister explain what visa an 18-year-old with no experience or qualifications would get that would put them on a pathway to residence?
Mr Speaker, there are a number of options available to someone in that situation. As I mentioned in the annual review debate on Tuesday, I clarified that situation. Someone in that situation could apply for a work visa if they separated their application from the residency application of their parents.
Which exact work visa could an 18-year-old with no experience and no skill apply for that would put them on a pathway to residence?
Mr Speaker, I'm not sure precisely what visa they would go for. I'm sure there are many options available to them. But what I would say, Mr Speaker, is that the situation with the processing of visas is a difficult one in terms of the skilled migrant category at the moment. And I will acknowledge the fact that the demand in the SMC category has increased. The processing of those applications are not rubber stamps. They are involved processes, and they should be. Also, in terms of skilled migrant category processing, we have had an enormous amount of increased demand as opposed to forecast.
Supplementary question, Mr Speaker. Will he now admit that by separating from their parents' residence application, those children over 18 would have no pathway to residence and no option but return home and be split from their families?
Mr Speaker, if the member is referring to the issue that I raised in the answer to my primary question, I did not say at that time that they had a path to residency, and have clarified that issue in the answer to my primary question.
Ricardo Menendez-March.
To the Minister, would granting residency visas to the many migrants who currently cannot participate fully in society not be a useful way to ensuring they can be safe from any resurgence of the pandemic?
Mr Speaker, that is an approach that the government has not decided to take. What approach we have decided to take is that for those who are on temporary visas, for the likes of working holiday visas or SSEs, is managing to be able to extend those visas in order for those people to stay in New Zealand.
Now that the Minister has admitted that there is no pathway to residence or ability to undertake domestic study, will he grant work visas to the dependent children of migrants who have finished school but are unable to work, study or volunteer because of the unprecedented delays in processing their families' resident visas?
Mr Speaker, I have addressed the issue around the processing delays for SMCs. I will reiterate that the demand there...
Order.
Mr Speaker, I have outlined that there are delays to processing for the SMC category. It does come down to increased demand and also the fact that some of the capacity of Immigration New Zealand that would normally process those applications is actually taken up by assessing applications for border exceptions. As to the question, that option is not under consideration.
Supplementary question. Has the Minister directed government MPs and their staff to not intervene in any immigration cases, and if so, why?
Mr Speaker, no.
Now we're going to cover the dependent work visa for children or dependent children in the video we do on anomalies, as this is one which the government is just refusing to acknowledge exists. He doesn't seem to understand how these things work. Following question time, we had the reason, one of the reasons I was in Wellington for originally, and that was the discussion of petitions that had been submitted to government regarding immigration. Now I won't include all the speeches from this session, though did note the Honourable Chris Farfoy did actually leave the Parliament halfway through the session. This was a session about petitions on immigration, and he wasn't there to hear them all or hear all of the discussions. One thing to note here is that New Zealand is a country in which even those who are not citizens or not residents or not even in the country have a right to be heard to some degree. I was first looking to come to Wellington due to Tinsy, who's one of our regular viewers, who had a petition regarding overseas students in this bunch of things being read. So it was great when I heard the opening speech from the Honourable Jackie Dean, who was the chair of the Petitions Committee. I have cut her speech down a little bit. It was a 9-minute speech, but I'll just include a little bit here for you to see.
Mr Speaker, it is a wonderful opportunity for myself as the chair of the Petitions Committee to introduce the work we have been doing, which has led to this debate in the House today. And in so doing, I wish to acknowledge and welcome those many people in the gallery today who are caught in an immigration system which seems not to meet their needs. Today, I want to focus, first of all, to introduce our work, the petitions, but to focus, as will my colleagues, on the human cost of this government's policies on individuals, their families and their whānau, not only for those here in New Zealand, but for those who are overseas and where families find themselves, due to this government's policies, far, far away from their loved ones, with no apparent end in sight for that separation. I want to acknowledge those people not only who petitioned our committee, but also who are here today and wider in New Zealand and across the globe, who are waiting for this government to act. So the Petitions Committee received such a number of petitions from people, individuals, who were stuck in the immigration system, that it occurred to my colleague, Tim van der Molen, that there would be an opportunity for the Petitions Committee to write to the Business Committee of Parliament and request a special debate. So I want to acknowledge Tim van der Molen for his foresight and his acknowledgement of the human pain that was occurring around New Zealand and wider, and for seeking a remedy that just moved this issue forward a little bit for those people. So if we can do that for those people in the gallery, if we can do that through this debate, if we can move things along just a little bit, then I think that will be something that we would be very pleased to do. So as chair of the committee, I'm going to run through those 12 initial petitions and the people behind them. There are more, but I will confine myself and just give a little flavour of the circumstances. And the first category I want to touch on are families who are affected by the border closure. So we heard from 4 petitioners who want sorry, I might just go through my notes and I will start there. Want to be able to come to New Zealand to be reunited with their families. And these people include temporary visa holders, their families and family members of New Zealanders. Natasha James came to work in New Zealand in 2020 January as a critical health worker, but her partner and children are still overseas. Shosong Lan has a similar request in his petition. He wants the government to grant border exemptions and MIQ spaces to all overseas partners of New Zealand citizens, residents and temporary visa holders. Paulina Chernyshova's petition, and I do apologise if I'm not getting the pronunciation of all these names correct today, I am sorry, says, and I quote, being separated from our families is affecting our mental health, efficiency and ability to focus on the research, the critical research we are undertaking. Mariana Tomarelli's petition says it is harder for families in non-visa waiver countries to gain entry to New Zealand, and she submits to us that the entry process should be the same from both types of countries. We have petitions from workers and students who are currently overseas. 7 petitions. Tinsy Mary Phillip is really frustrated that the border is closed to students who were granted study visas before entry restrictions began. And she describes their financial and mental health problems as a result of not being allowed to enter. We can see a theme coming through here. Nandita Alexander, her husband and their toddler were living and working in New Zealand but got stranded overseas while visiting relatives at the start of the lockdown, and they just want to come back. Yuting Mak seeks to extend the exemptions to all migrants who still have work in New Zealand. Mandeep Singh asks that the following people be allowed entry into New Zealand: people with work or study visas who had been living long-term in New Zealand, offshore partners who were issued a visa to join their partner in New Zealand before the borders were closed. Julie South is very concerned about a shortage of veterinarians, and I read in the media that there is now a critical shortage of veterinarians, which is applying considerable pressure on those very vets who are working in New Zealand. Belen Machiavello asks that the government allow migrants within current New Zealand visas who are stuck offshore to re-enter New Zealand. And then we had requests to extend the work visas of people already in New Zealand. Marie Louisa Bock simply wants a plan for what will happen when working holiday visas expire at the end of June this year. Kate Gillette requests temporary flexibility of visa conditions for wine industry workers, so that will be enough staff for the 2021 vintage. I do hope that the vintage is now complete, that there are enough workers to get on with the thinning which is now underway. Carlos is frustrated that the government has paused its processing of expressions of interests for skilled migrant category, and Arta Kasanov is frustrated about the length of time, simply the length of time taken by Immigration New Zealand to process skilled migrant category residence application. He simply wants a decision. These people simply want a decision from Immigration New Zealand, from this government, so that they can move on with their lives. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Following that, Erica Stanford then gave another great speech, one that she is clearly showing her emotion in. For her, this is not about scoring votes. This is her taking my stance on doing this because somebody needs to do it and somebody needs to get change for migrants.
I call on Erica Stanford.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would like to start by acknowledging the people in the gallery who came here today. The Speaker who just sat down, the chair of the committee that the Labour MPs sat on, that rejected your calls for an inquiry into split migrant families and into effects of migrants on the border closures.
I remind the member not to bring me into her speech.
You wouldn't, sorry, those members in the gallery wouldn't need to be here today if we had that inquiry. They would have been able to come to the Select Committee and tell us about their struggles. That was the vehicle. They didn't need to be here today, but here we are back again, Madam Speaker, having to go through the same steps day after day. Ireja Wejitonga went on the news last night crying over the children she hasn't seen in a year because she's a construction worker, watching 300 more construction workers come in with their families over the next 6 months. It's the migrant nurse anomaly all over again. And the member who just took her seat talks about the achievements of this government and governments in reuniting split migrant families. Well, that announcement a month ago was, as I expected it would be, was a very small proportion of the total of those migrant families. And they lauded it as some wonderful policy that they'd done their job, but in fact most of those migrant families are still sitting, waiting for a roadmap for reunification for their families. They continue to wait. We have been calling on this government for months and months for a roadmap for reunification for every single split migrant family so that they have some light at the end of the tunnel. And as my other colleagues on this side of the House have said, that no one has said that they want to see their family tomorrow. They all understand that there will be delays. They just want to know that it will happen. There are 1,800 rooms right now in MIQ and have been for the last few weeks empty. We could have reunited 1,700 split migrant families in the last 2 weeks, and we did nothing. And that is atrocious. Why are we here? We're here because there were so many petitions that were lodged about this broken immigration system that we had to have our very first special debate triggered by this new committee on immigration. We have it because we've got a minister who spent the good part of the year failing to act to reunite split migrant families, Labour MPs shutting down a Select Committee inquiry, and a government through their own policy settings have caused the longest residency queue in our nation's history. That started well before COVID ever hit. We have highly skilled migrants who are sitting in a queue that at best will take 2 years for them, and at worst is going absolutely nowhere and is completely frozen. And if their children turn 18, they can't work, they can't study, they can't even go out and volunteer at their local hospital. Otherwise they won't be dependent and they won't get residency with their family's application. And we have been calling on the government to at least let those children study. Some of them are going back and doing year 13 again. Can anyone in this House imagine how bad that is for the mental health of a young person? There is no fair-minded Kiwi in this nation that thinks it's okay to leave an 18-year-old to rot for 2, 3, 4 years, wasting their potential because of the residency queues caused by poor government policy. These skilled migrants are highly stressed, highly anxious. They're living in limbo with no certainty, there's no surety that the country they moved to and made their home, the country that they work hard for, will still be their home at the end of what is a traumatic immigration experience. And while it's terrible for those migrants who are sitting up there in the gallery, it's terrible for us because we need them here. They are our teachers, they are our nurses, they are our doctors, our IT workers. We need them here. Madam Speaker, I just want to finish by saying that on the weekend was Mother's Day, and I didn't post about Mother's Day because I couldn't. The day before Mother's Day on Saturday, I went to Christchurch. I did a public meeting and I spoke to women afterwards who stood there crying with me, at me, because they hadn't seen their children in a year. How could I, in good conscience, post about Mother's Day and how wonderful it is to be with my children when these women haven't seen their children in a year because of this government's utter incompetence? It is not good enough and they have to do something about it.
Finally, and perhaps my favourite speech of the day, at least my favourite speech from Parliament, was from Chris Bishop. He was being shouted down by a Labour MP who had to be warned several times by the Madam Speaker. Yes, these are politicians and this is politics, but it is the right thing to do. Chris is another strong voice for migrants in Parliament, and this is what he had to say.
I call on Chris Bishop.
Greg O'Connor says that members of this side are using the people in the gallery.
And another one stands up to do the same thing.
Order. Let's let Chris Bishop give his speech, please.
He says we're using the people in this gallery who have come to Parliament twice now.
Yes, you are.
Can I remind the member not to bring me into the debate?
People have turned up to this Parliament twice now in good faith to ask for the government to have a heart and do the right thing and sort out their immigration status. An immigration status that, through no fault of their own, because of the impact of COVID-19, has been negatively effective. I want to pay tribute to those in the gallery. We in the opposition, led by Erica Stanford, our immigration spokesperson,
are leveraging this to the...
Order.
I might just want to reflect on your behaviour, Greg. There are people watching in the gallery and on TV, and I don't think they'll be very impressed by it. We are doing the right thing and representing those who have come to Parliament and asked the government for action. Well, the thing about immigration, and this was going to be my next point, the thing about Parliament is it's political. It's an amazing thing. We're all elected here and we're sent here to Parliament to do a job. Let's be very clear. Immigration is political. It's political because government policy is decided by politicians. It's government policy to not act on split migrant families. That makes it political. MIQ resourcing is political because it's the government decides how many beds are available in MIQ and how they'll be allocated. Just yesterday we had the Minister announcing that we're going to have RSE workers coming in, construction workers coming in. We welcome that on the side of the House. But the failure to act on the split migrants is political. Immigration funding is political because it's the government that decides how much money goes into the Immigration Department, and that decides how many immigration staff there are, and that decides how quickly they process residence applications. That's why we have, as Ms Stanford pointed out, the longest backlog in New Zealand history. That's political. That's what Parliament is for. That's why we're having this debate. It's to interrogate those issues. That's the whole point of a democracy. So that is, of course, why immigration policy and actions are political, and that's, of course, why we are interested in it. Maya Lubeck says, let's not politicise this. Immigration policy is political. Ms Stanford is doing the right thing. There are very few things that you come across in Parliament, Madam Speaker, that I think are indefensible. But the situation with the split migrant families that has been brought to the House's attention through these petitions and through the protests on the forecourt today and in the past are indefensible. Cameron Conradi moved here in good faith. The teacher at Hutt Valley High School in the Hutt, teaching maths. He moved here in good faith. He was paid to come here. The government incentivised him to move to New Zealand, and he did so in good faith. He came here in January 2020, and his family were to follow. The story's been told on a few occasions. They packed up their belongings, they liquidated their assets, and then the COVID happened. And no one's saying that wasn't unfortunate and that there had to be a response. But in May 2021, he is saying, and we agree, and a lot of people agree with us, he is saying, let's reunite my family. And he looks at the MIQ numbers, 1,800 beds available last week on average each night, and says, I have moved to New Zealand, I want my family to come, why can they not come? And there are no excuses from the government. No. There are no excuses. The government has not been able to point to any. And it is completely unreasonable. Our position, and the position of Mr Conradi and the split migrants who are here in the gallery and on the forecourt, is either allow us to come to New Zealand and reunite our families, or at the very least let's have a roadmap. And from the Minister today in his speech and at the forecourt, we didn't even get that. It is political, but it's also indefensible. That's why we're having the debate, and that's why the gallery is full.
Post-editing, Arran here again. I'm going to say goodbye now because before we put into the speeches from the migrants at the end of the rally last week, I'll take my speeches on at the end and the interview I did. Mine certainly, as I said, aren't as important as the messages that these migrants provide, so I would ask that you stay and watch at least the messages that they provide, if not my own. I'll be back next week with our video on the many anomalies within Immigration New Zealand currently, and perhaps some work to show our work on character waivers if we get some information back from Immigration. We've put in some Privacy Act requests from Immigration as to some character waiver issues we've been seeing recently. Until then, kia kaha, stay safe.
My name is Antonia O'Neill and this is Patrick. Sorry. I am one in many of 13,000 that are waiting for the allocation of the skilled migrant category. I arrived in New Zealand 5 years ago and I fell in love with the beauty of this country and I knew I wanted to stay here. With my skills and experience, I was able to apply for my skilled migrant back in January 2020 with the help of my lawyer. Unbeknown to me back then, there was a backlog dating back to 2018. I found out I was pregnant in the midst of COVID and Patrick was born. He is a Kiwi citizen. He doesn't need a visa to stay here, but I do. I've been patiently waiting, as I said, 17 months, just like everyone else. And I wonder how long I have to wait. Like thousands of other migrants, my question to the government and to the Minister of Immigration, Mr. Chris Parfai, is why? Why is there a backlog? Why is it a pandemic to move the queue a little? Why has the queue suddenly stopped? Why have you prioritised what people get paid to determine their skill?
Why?
Why? Do you wake up every morning and go, oh, I'm going to do this, I'm skilled in it? No. Why have you split families? Why did you tell healthcare workers to come here and then no, you can't bring your families? The border's closed.
Try living without your parents or your kids or your partner. They have been waiting since more than a year now.
Depending on their parent visas, not being able to do anything, work, study or even volunteer. Instead they sit at home waiting, wasting their time and education and skills they learned in this country. Why are we suffering? My story is one of thousands in New Zealand. Everyone has their struggles, even their own stress, the stress of not seeing their children or families, the emotional and mental stress that follows as well. I haven't seen my family since before the border closure. My family hasn't met Patrick, and I really wonder when they will be able to. If something happens at home, I could leave, but I'm not entitled to come back. I'm not a resident, I'm not a partner of a resident, and the way you've treated split families, I wouldn't be able to come back in. Patrick can though. What is he to do? Grow up without his mother? Meanwhile, the Wiggles, the TV crews and their nannies are allowed in. I wonder my son is a New Zealand citizen, but without residency we may have to go, leave the country that he was born into. because immigration is so messed up here. Thank you.
My name is Arran Hunt and I'm from the state of Kerala in India. I quit my job as a journalist in India to move to New Zealand in January 2017 to complete a master's degree from the University of Canterbury. I've been working in Wellington since mid-2018. I want to voice my despair and frustration over months of maltreatment and anxiety induced by dealing with immigration in New Zealand and their practices, which I can only describe as short-sighted, greedy, and xenophobic.
True.
I moved to New Zealand alone, with my entire family still residing in India, anticipating with bated breath that my residency will be approved. After receiving an approved expression of interest in January 2020 and putting in an application under the skilled migrant category, my family as well as myself have been perplexed and frustrated by the lack of communications and extended delays from Immigration New Zealand. My message to the Minister of Immigration, Chris Farfoy, and other policymakers in New Zealand is this: immigrants sacrifice their lives with their families, uproot themselves from their homes and surroundings in search of a better life, where they have security and the capability to be financially independent while also providing for their loved ones. Please acknowledge our sacrifice and our desire to be a part of this great country's fabric by hastening the residency process and recognize the value of our services in communities across Aotearoa. No immigrant is willing to give up, despite the toll on their mental well-being and the anxiety of rejection, because we simply cannot afford to. None of us are to be stuck in the largest backlog of applications in the history of this nation, with wait times now measured in years rather than months.
Only.
Unacceptable. It's outrageous. Unacceptable.
While we are stuck in limbo, our lives remain on hold, paralyzed to make any decision about our future. Essentially, all of these debacles have created a migrant population that's left with few rights and at risk of exploitation, with no benefits to fall back on. This is the bottom line that waits us as immigrants, that despite working hard to meet all the relevant criteria, investing many years of our lives and all of our cash into New Zealand, and spending thousands of dollars in application fees, all we receive is mental distress and dehumanization. I say dehumanization because I am no longer a human being. I am just my application number. One out of thousands of applications. While we wait for a resolution, we immigrants will continue to work hard for New Zealand, paying our taxes and contributing to a political system that does not represent us or have our interests in their hearts. We hunker down, we do the best that we can, and we just hope that's going to be enough. But I can tell you today, ministers, that hope is dwindling very fast. I would like to extend my solidarity to all of my immigrant brothers and sisters, especially the ones who continue to be separated from their children, from their families. Thank you for patiently.
My name is Cameron. I'm known amongst the split family community as the statistician. And I would like to point out that my 46 followers on Twitter include economists, news editors, journalists, politicians, and only one bot. We all love to hate the Wiggles because they stole managed isolation rooms from New Zealanders. Well, the truth is that they actually did not. Because during March, there were on average 404 vacant rooms per day. Many of you love to hate the Honourable Minister Chris Farfoy. I love him. I tag him more than anyone else in my tweets.
We all tag you.
We don't hate him, we love him too.
He's like a teddy bear.
You can do much more than that.
How much more patience do you want from us?
Okay, I will quickly relate my story, which is relevant because it has common elements to the stories of many others split from their families. Like most countries, New Zealand has a long-standing shortage of teachers, particularly in STEM subjects. My wife, who is also a teacher, and I were enticed to move here through active marketing by this government. There is even a dedicated government website, teachinNewzealand.co.nz.
Really? Yep.
And to spice up the deal, I was offered a total of $8,000 towards relocation costs.
Oh, wow.
As a specialist mathematics teacher, I quickly received a job offer for a permanent position in October 2019 and did absolutely everything to honor that commitment and arrive on time to start teaching in January 2020. I was told by an immigration advisor that I would never have enough time to have my qualifications assessed, gain occupational registration, and visa approval. I resigned from my job and set about proving her wrong. I did it. As is the norm, my wife and son were due to follow me just a few months later, after wrapping up our affairs at home. The border then closed, and of course their visa applications remain untouched for well over 13 months, and we are stuck in an endless limbo. In recognition of a well-tested labour market shortage of teachers, and in recognition of my verified skills and experience, I was issued a work-to-residence visa and reassurance that my family were on target for a clear pathway to residency. I must also point out that, as is the case for many offshore partners, my wife would easily have been a primary visa applicant due to her similar skills and experience. I cashed out my pension, we sold our house at a loss, liquidated assets, packed up our household effects, rehomed our dogs, and even helped my in-laws to move to a retirement village in preparation for our move. We committed everything. Many split families will have a similar tale. Those of us with children would never have committed to moving here without conducting due diligence and having a reasonable assurance of gaining residence and permanency, so that we can truly become part of the community and contribute positively to New Zealand. Many of us were recruited from abroad, and our employers will be very upset if we are forced to leave. The core function of the Ministry of Immigration is to enable New Zealand employers to access and retain workers across the spectrum of skill shortages. So how do we reunite families and make sure that New Zealand employers retain skills? The answer is to simply make use of the thousands of managed isolation rooms standing empty and already paid for by us, the taxpayers. Despite the recent reduction in operational capacity by 500 rooms, for the 7 days prior to yesterday, there were on average 1,812 vacant rooms per day in managed isolation. By simply using the last 2 weeks worth of empty rooms, more than 1,700 families could have been reunited. Now you might argue that there will be very few rooms available due to the new announcement of students, refugees, construction workers, RSC workers, sheep shearers and plant operators allowed entry. If you crunch the numbers, the truth is that over the next 3 months, assuming that operational capacity is held at 4,000 rooms, less than 2,000 of the more than 25,000 room vouchers will be used by those people.
Oh, they didn't do the math.
How do you reunite families? Just use the empty room.
Yeah, simple. It's simple.
Honorable Ministers and all my dear friends, I am Iresha Vijetonda. We had a dream to migrate New Zealand for betterment of my children's future. Me and my husband we decided to select New Zealand as it is the safest, developed and beautiful country to raise a family. Further, I found that there is a good demand for the quantity surveyor, which is my profession for last 15 years. I am a 15-year experienced quantity surveyor I had been worked Dubai and Sri Lanka for 15 years. So I left Sri Lanka along my husband, my daughters and my son. And at that time we not received our dependent visa. But after I reached New Zealand at 4th of March 2020, we received our dependent visa. Unfortunately, my family couldn't make to fly to New Zealand as that we had that very short time that immigration, the border closure happened around 20th of March and we got the visa on 4th of March. So there was 2 weeks. Then it is not practically enough to prepare everything like this children getting officially out from school and my husband have to leave from his office, his work, and also we have to get the ticket arrangement, everything. So I have now that 10-year-old my daughter and 5-year-old, 6-year-old my son, and they were 9-year and 5-year-old at that time I left Sri Lanka. So my daughter is very attached with me, and both of children are still anxiously waiting to come to New Zealand.
Don't cry.
Don't cry.
Before I left for New Zealand, I had organized all the family luggage as it is. To me, it is kind of a mother work. Everything remains in luggage, and I know by now that some of my son and daughters' clothes and everything were not fit for them because they are now growing. Shana is now growing and is now that age where she needs necessary to live with her mother. Now my husband cannot report to work properly as he is the one who care my both of children. Now my husband is doing the role of mother and father both. My daughter sometimes terrified by dream because she was used to sleep with me when I was there. Both my children now home school because we were expected to leave to have been New Zealand by now because that we thought it will happen day by day. We were waiting like from one event to other. Like we were thought before this last election it will happen. Then again we thought December before that Christmas it will happen. But nothing happened. But we will wait very patiently. We will wait with our suffering. I struggle through the completion of master in quantity surveying degree in Mysore University. It is a cost of 35,000, and now I am working pursuant to a 3-year post-study work visa, and I am currently working as a construction company as a quantity surveyor.
Well done.
And actually I got 2 jobs after I complete my degree. Whenever I work from last year May 20-hour work basis as a quantity surveyor. Actually I got it I thought I lucky to get that my profession. But after I complete my master, I got one in Auckland and one in Tauranga. But I selected Tauranga one because I thought, okay, Tauranga needs some skill person, so I moved to Tauranga last month. So, however, I am living now empty and meaningless life without my husband and children. I have been suffering from depression and I haven't been able to proper eat or do any interest or any entertainment thing. I am doing my best to keep my head screwed on straight as I currently hold the responsibility of my family future. I have applied many times for board exception to enable to family to New Zealand. I have been unsuccessful every time. And the last attempt was 30th April 2021, which was for temporary visa holders dependent. But that was also declined. Then I was so fed up. actually, me and my husband thought, okay, this is our last time we will able to get this. But the reason was in the decline. You hold a relationship-based visa on 19th March 2020, but the visa would now have expired even if you had been able to travel to New Zealand earlier.
Whose fault is that?
So we got dependent visa on 4th March, and my initial plan was to bring my family end of the March because at that time just 3 weeks. And for arrangement for traveling after receiving a visa, and it would be practically take at least a month. So that some reason it is not it is difficult because that as I saw take that officially take the leave from my schools and book the flight ticket, and at that time I was living in a single accommodation and I need to have a family accommodation, and so despite of the above practical reason, I was bringing them as soon as they got the visa. Actually, if I knew that that border was going to close, I will do it anyhow. I will pay full that maximum amount for the air ticket, and I will arrange everything because I never lived without my daughter and son. Even for one day before that I came to New Zealand. So I am very, very kindly requesting to this all honourable ministers and that immigration responsible parties to please give your attention to be reunited with this our families. I am talking about all of these mothers who lost their children. Thank you very much.
Enough! Okay, so my turn again. I will keep this brief because you've already heard from me, but I thought I should share my story. My story is that my family and I are in a suspended expression of interest queue, along with around 7,000 other applications.
9,000 now?
Is it 9,000?
9,000!
I'm here today with my husband and my daughter. I can't see them right now, but they are around somewhere. We arrived here in October of 2019, having sold our house in the Netherlands, given up our jobs and said goodbye to our families. My very talented husband was offered a job just before lockdown and was able to start that job in May of last year, as ANZ wasn't able to process our visas during lockdown. I was offered work last July. Fairly immediately we got together documents for our residence and applied in September last year. We have between the two of us 220 points as skilled migrants, and it used to be the case that we could expect our residence to be processed within months. But since there is no new planning range for the residence programme, everything has ground to a halt. We have no idea how long it might take to get residence. In the meantime, we can't buy a home, we can't vote, we can't get a loan or a credit card. My husband will probably argue that the last one is a good thing. In all seriousness, this has had a huge impact on our lives and on our daughter's life. She was 3.5 when we arrived. Aotearoa is really the only home she remembers. I know we lose patience with her more quickly than we should, and I know it's because we live with a constant hum of stress about whether we'll be able to stay in this beautiful country, a country we dreamed of settling in for several years before we finally came here. We feel that she is paying a price for our decision to come here, and no one wants to feel that they are harming their child, particularly when the main reason we moved here was for her to have an outdoors childhood, feet in the sand at the beach. She recently started school at Paikokariki, which she loves. I'm sure she's missing being there today, but we wanted her to join us. As we say to this government, please hear us. We chose this as our home. We contribute in any number of ways: volunteering, working, paying taxes, treating the sick, teaching our children, caring for our elderly. We can do better than this. The Minister, you have it within your power to grant us all residence with the stroke of a pen.
Use those powers!
Use those powers! Use those powers! Use those powers! Use those powers!
We know that the immigration system here is broken. We feel the effects of that every day. We welcome being part of a longer-term conversation about immigration here. But we are already here. This is such an easy fix. It's not climate change. It's not systemic racism. All this takes is the willingness to do what is kind and what is fair. This is a humanitarian crisis in our own backyard, and because we can fix it, we must. Thank you.
It's hard act to follow. I've got to say, Mike, you're a great speaker. It is heartwarming to be here, but also heartbreaking. It's great to see everyone coming together to sort of for this common cause, and obviously a lot of passion, a lot of pain here, and that's the heartbreaking part. And there's actually a need to be here today. This separation of partners, that's what I want to talk about today, is just heartbreaking, because people are here, they are contributing, they're a part of this country, they've come here for a reason, they come here with the trust for the government, they will back their relationship, back their family, back their future here, and they've been let down. They've come here, they've applied, they've done what they're required to, and we hear and we understand that there is a COVID outbreak, there is things happening, but there is also a path forward and a way of doing things going forward. So many have applied, and I've got to say some very bad words here. A number of you don't want to trigger people, but living together. Living together is the most frustrating word that I've heard in the last 2 years, and I get asked that a lot on YouTube. What does this mean? What does it mean this week? It's constantly changing, constantly getting harder. This requirement of proof of immigration that you and your partner are living together by their standards. And for those of you who come from cultural areas or religions where that was not an allowance, or that's something that you've only done for a short period of time, you need to prove to them in 3,000 characters or less that you have lived together, that you meet the standard that an immigration officer is being forced to enforce.
Despite them having kids.
Despite them having kids, yes. Well, I have one person who spoke to me, 10-year relationship. People in different religions, but they spent 7 years convincing both families that they were in love and they wanted to be together the rest of their lives. They got married, they spent several months together. One of them came to New Zealand. New Zealand says, no, I'm sorry, you're not genuine and stable. I have Rob. Rob is a New Zealand citizen. He has a solo father, 3 children here. He works in essential services. He keeps the power on during the pandemic, during the lockdowns. He was out there working on the lines. One of his children is disabled. So for him going overseas to bring his partner and to get that time together is not an option. So he applied and said, look, I need my partner here to help me, to be there, support me, to help me with my disabled child. As a solo father, wouldn't work. America said, no, you haven't lived together. Or you haven't lived together long enough. You're not genuine and stable. No consideration to what is best for the children, for him, for the country. A client of mine, doctor, citizen, decades of experience, same situation. Children here, one disabled, wants to bring his partner across. America said, no, you can't. Haven't lived together long enough, and he fell in love with someone from a non-visa waiver country. The answer was, leave the country, go and collect them. We're going to lose a doctor of several decades of experience, a specialist, to leave the country. The Prime Minister was asked during question time a few weeks back by News Hub, the situation with the critical health workers for citizens, what happens then? Oh, talk to the Minister. We've tried that, no response. He will not get involved if you are coming in from overseas, unless you're an entertainer, it seems. What we do see though is people have been offered out of the goodness of immigration's heart, and this is not a dig at immigration in New Zealand, this is a dig at the government because they are following instructions. They get granted a general visitor visa. Like yes, you're genuine and stable, but not living together. So here we go, offer your general visitor visa. When can we use that? When the border opens. Great, when's that? There's been nothing, there's been no plan. We're 14 months in now, you know, a couple months in, fair enough, wouldn't know what's going to happen, things are crazy. A year after that now, where's the plan? The government can set 10 years of forecast of income and expenditure. They have teams of people who are doing this information. Give us something, give migrants something, give the post-study open work visas stuck offshore something, an idea of when the dates are going to be. Give the student visa applicants who have a place in New Zealand an idea when they're going to be. Those on general visit visas, those are separated. Give them a date, give them a plan. You know, their plan may change, but it gives them something to plan their lives around. Every morning they wake up and they have this hope that today's the day they're going to hear good news. Every night they get crushed because it wasn't. And so we have a government who would come through and just making almost knee-jerk reactions. Well, something's been raised, here's a quick change, that's today's good news, see you whenever. So we're calling, maybe I'm going to follow what Katie was saying. Give us a plan, give us a schedule, a calendar. Here's our plan. It might change, we know that. that allows all of you and those offshore to give some structure to their lives. What's going to happen in the next 3, 6, 9, 10, 12 months? Give us something. Don't just be quiet and just once in a while give us some scraps. Thank you.
We're with a very special person, Arran Hunter, right here with us, and we'll just go up to him and ask his thoughts about what he thinks about today's protest and the whole moment, especially after the feedback from the Auckland Vigil, and I will let Arran take away.
It's one of those sort of very much sort of a mixed feelings about being here. You know, it is great to see this crowd growing. It's great to see this support for this movement, for a collective voice about the harm people are going through and the hurt. And that's the bad side of it. Is I love seeing people here, but I hate seeing them having to be here. Now there shouldn't be a need for this. I think there should be a better way of doing this, where people can come here, they can be here, we can partner together, we can have people who are sitting in a residency queue actually going to the residence. They're here for long enough. This is just a mess of legislation, a mess of interpretation, a mess of how immigration is done, have been given instructions by the government. And hopefully today we can get a message across that things could be done better. You know, we aren't expecting to click your fingers, everything's solved, the borders are open, because there is a virus going around, and that's the important thing about it. But it could be done better. It's been done in a haphazard sort of knee-jerk reaction. Next week something new comes out, and it almost seems like they were deciding on the day what they're going to do. There's been no planning, no forward future. There's no, for those of you who are offshore, no saying, hey, here's the plan for 6 months or 8 months or 2 months or something to give you certainty, give you a chance to arrange your lives in that period. It's been a day by day of pain of, well, is today the day? In the end of the day, no it's not, and we're crushed again. And I took to clients all the time who were around the world, and one the other day speaking to her in Dubai, and she was in tears on the phone to me because it's now been more than a year of waiting to come here with all of their money invested to come into New Zealand for her to study. And they are stuck there in Dubai in a tiny room with everything all tidied up, all ready to go, enrollment, everything, but being able to be here.
Right.
And just the simple fact that they have no idea when it's going to be. If they could say, okay, it's going to be 6 months, they could go, cool, 6 months, get a job for this period of time, arrange something else, do something else, go somewhere else. But there's nothing, no word, and just asking Arran any news today. So there's so much more they could be doing.
Do you think that the government is going forward with the strategy of elimination, using COVID as a, as we all know?
They are using that strategy of elimination, but it doesn't mean they have to have a situation where the borders are closed and there's no information when they're going to open. We are seeing the borders opening for certain people, selective groups, but it seems to be very selective as to who it is and very much bits and pieces. And I think it comes down to often who the people on their side are. So you have, now we've got big construction companies bringing people in, which is understandable. We have the construction project. But then we have clients who are doctors trying to bring across their partner and being told no from the minister, I won't talk to you and think about it. But entertainers, no worries, and you come, emergency MIQ. And I'm saying to my clients, yes, your options are leave the country for 3-4 months, your patients' lives are at risk, or ignore your partner. And that should be a situation where we're getting sort of doctors and national health care come second to the Wiggles.
Right.
So yeah, the borders are closed for a reason, I understand that, but they need to be managed better as to who is coming in, how we're doing it, or at least tell people when they're going to open.
Right. Thank you, Arran, for your